During an arrogant patrol, two racist police officers brazenly stopped a black man's car without any legitimate reason. They coincidentally found a bag of drugs in the trunk, a filthy trap they had set up beforehand to ruin his life. But what they didn't expect? The man they thought would be an easy target was a CIA agent, someone far too familiar with deadly traps far more dangerous than theirs. When the truth came to light, it wasn't just these corrupt officers who fell. It dragged down an entire system rotten with corruption and injustice. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a damning verdict against a system built on prejudice. Are you ready to witness this explosive twist of fate? If stories of justice and truth ignite your spirit, don't forget to hit subscribe. What happens next will leave you speechless. However, a small but significant issue occurred. His car's taillight was flickering, something Michael was unaware of. This quickly caught the attention of two police officers, Bradley Jenkins and Mark Sullivan, who patrolled the area. Jenkins and Sullivan, known in the community for their racist attitudes and aggressive behavior, were on the lookout for a suitable target to harass. Seeing Michael, a polished black man, driving through the area was enough to catch their eye. In the patrol car, Jenkins exchanged a brief conversation with Sullivan, and the two agreed to pull Michael over. Jenkins, with ambitions of climbing to higher ranks within the police department, was always looking for opportunities to impress his superiors. He didn't hesitate to abuse his power to achieve his goals, disregarding professional ethics. During a late-night patrol, he once told Sullivan, "You know, big wins will take us places others never reach. All it takes is a little boldness, and we'll be on top." On the other hand, Sullivan did not entirely share Jenkins' ambition. As a less experienced officer, he often felt pressured by his senior colleagues' assertive and decisive personality. Sullivan frequently hesitated when faced with unethical actions, but ultimately gave in. "You've got to learn to play by the rules of those above us," Jenkins had told him when Sullivan questioned a similar arrest in the past. Despite this, Sullivan began to feel increasingly uneasy about what they were doing, especially when targeting vulnerable individuals like Michael. But under Jenkins' pressure and the fear of losing his job, he reluctantly agreed to go along. They turned on their police lights, signaling Michael to pull over. Michael, always law-abiding, calmly pulled to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and rolled down the window. He watched the two officers approach with cautious but polite eyes. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" Michael asked in a steady tone. Jenkins didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he leaned into the car window and began firing off a series of questions. "What are you doing in this area? Where are you headed at this hour?" His tone was filled with suspicion and accusation, while the questions themselves were vague and leading. Though Michael tried to explain that he had just come from a meeting and was staying at a nearby hotel, Jenkins and Sullivan were unsatisfied. Sullivan walked around the car, shining a flashlight into every corner. Jenkins, with a domineering tone, commanded, "Step out of the vehicle immediately." Michael hesitated briefly. He sensed that something was wrong, but decided to cooperate. He opened the car door and stepped out, maintaining his calm demeanor. Jenkins' eyes glinted with satisfaction as Sullivan approached the trunk, flashlight in hand. "Well, what do we have here?" Sullivan announced loudly, opening the trunk and pulling out a small zippered bag. Inside was a carefully packaged bag of drugs. Michael stood frozen in disbelief. "This is yours, isn't it?" Jenkins said with a sneering smile. Michael immediately understood what had happened. He knew he had never seen the bag before and was certain it had been planted in his car. His heart sank, but his face remained composed. He realized he had just been framed, a situation that threatened not only his reputation, but also his life and his covert career. The two officers handcuffed Michael and put him in the patrol car without further explanation. In Michael's mind, thoughts raced. As a CIA agent, he knew this situation could lead to dire consequences. But Michael refused to panic. He knew this battle was just beginning. Jenkins and Sullivan, seeing Michael handcuffed and seated in the patrol car, felt a deep satisfaction from the drama they had orchestrated. With a smug attitude, Jenkins glanced at Sullivan, nodding slightly as if everything was going according to plan. Both were accustomed to abusing their power to create achievements they proudly bragged about within the police department. Earlier, Jenkins and Sullivan had prepared a bag of drugs, carefully wrapped in plastic, and stashed it in the patrol car. This wasn't the first time they had pulled such a despicable stunt. They believed that arresting a black man in the area would be seen by their superiors as an accomplishment, further solidifying their influence within the department. "We just need a few more cases like this to meet this month's quota," Sullivan had said during a private conversation with Jenkins. "And if the person looks as suspicious as this guy, no one will question it." Jenkins, who was ambitious to climb the ranks quickly, had no qualms about engaging in unethical actions. He had previously been the subject of complaints for his aggressive behavior toward black drivers, but those complaints were always swept under the rug thanks to his connections with leadership in the department. This time, he was confident that arresting Michael Davis would serve as proof of his efficiency at work. As Sullivan held up the bag of drugs like a trophy, Jenkins turned to Michael, his gaze cold and piercing. "This is indisputable evidence. You'll pay for this," Jenkins said, his tone dripping with mockery. Despite the pressure, Michael maintained an incredible level of composure. He knew that reacting with anger or resistance would only worsen the situation. Instead, he focused on mentally recording every detail. How Jenkins directed Sullivan, how Sullivan deliberately opened the trunk without consent, and the smug expressions on their faces. He understood that these details would later serve as weapons to turn the tables. Inside the patrol car, as he was driven to the police station, Michael remained silent. He analyzed the situation carefully. As a CIA agent with years of experience in covert missions, Michael recognized that he was facing a well-organized scheme, far beyond a typical arrest. He knew that Jenkins and Sullivan were not acting randomly, and that this was just the tip of a larger corrupt system. Meanwhile, at the police station, Jenkins and Sullivan made no effort to hide their excitement. They even embellished the story to make Michael appear like a more dangerous criminal. "Write in the report that he appeared nervous when stopped," Jenkins ordered, "and don't forget to add that he tried to argue with us." Sullivan complied, fabricating additional details in the report. "With what we've got, there's no way he'll get out of this," Sullivan said, flashing a malicious grin. What they didn't know was that their sloppy actions and overconfidence would soon become evidence against them. Michael, sitting silently in the holding cell, showed no signs of panic. In his mind, a plan was taking shape, fueled by a determination not only to clear his name, but also to expose Jenkins and Sullivan's wrongdoing to the world. The wheels of righteous retribution had begun to turn, and Michael knew he wouldn't fight this battle alone. While Michael sat silently in the holding cell, his face betraying no emotion, his mind was working relentlessly. He was not only strategizing how to clear his name, but also evaluating the danger this situation posed to his identity and his covert work. As a CIA agent, every second spent in the police station increased the risk of his identity being exposed, potentially leading to disastrous consequences for the missions he was involved in. Michael understood that this was not simply a case of wrongful arrest. If his identity were revealed, his entire network and his colleagues could be put in jeopardy. For Michael, this was not just a personal battle, but a fight for the survival of an entire system. On the other side, Jenkins and Sullivan were basking in their smugness. In the police station's break room, they eagerly recounted the achievement they had just pulled off. Jenkins confidently proclaimed to his colleagues that Michael Davis was a drug dealer caught red-handed, even embellishing fabricated details to make the story more convincing. "That guy had no idea what hit him," Jenkins said with a triumphant laugh. "He completely fell apart when we found the bag of drugs in his car." Sullivan, sitting beside him, was equally thrilled. "I told you, just one look at him, and you could tell he was trouble. Taking him down was as easy as flipping a coin." The surrounding officers, familiar with Jenkins and Sullivan's methods, chose not to object. Most remained silent, partly out of fear of retaliation and partly because they had become desensitized to the way officers like Jenkins abused their power and manipulated the truth. Meanwhile, at CIA headquarters, Michael's unexplained absence quickly raised red flags. A critical meeting he was scheduled to lead had been postponed due to his no-show, an event entirely out of character for the disciplined and professional Michael. The agency immediately launched an internal investigation to locate him. Michael's colleagues, well-versed in rapid tracking techniques, took only a few hours to discover that he was being held at a local police station on drug-related charges. Jenkins and Sullivan were completely unaware that they had tangled with someone who was not easily subdued. They viewed Michael as just another victim, an easy target, a black man who could be swiftly framed and fed into the justice system without much resistance. "We just need to file the report, and this will all blow over quickly," Sullivan assured Jenkins as they finalized the case paperwork. "The higher-ups will be impressed." But they had no idea that behind Michael's silence lay a sharp mind, a meticulously forming plan and support from a powerful organization they could not fathom. While Jenkins and Sullivan boasted and reveled in their so-called victory, Michael quietly observed everything. He mentally recorded every detail: the way Jenkins gave orders, Sullivan's behavior, the words they exchanged, and even their excessive overconfidence. These observations would become the tools Michael would use to turn the tables. With every passing minute, Michael became more certain that he needed to act wisely and swiftly. His secrecy was at risk, and there was only one way to protect himself and his mission: uncover the truth and expose Jenkins and Sullivan's corruption to justice. Michael was not just up against two rogue officers, he was confronting an entire system of abuse and power that he knew he had to dismantle. This battle had only just begun. When news of Michael Davis's arrest reached the CIA, they immediately contacted Rebecca Turner, a renowned attorney with an exceptional track record in fighting injustice. Rebecca, a resilient black woman, was not only known for her sharp intelligence but also for her unwavering commitment to pursuing the truth. To Rebecca, this wasn't just another case. It was an opportunity to expose the systemic injustices lurking beneath the surface. As she entered the jail, Rebecca was immediately struck by Michael's calm demeanor. Despite being detained under such unfavorable circumstances, he showed no signs of panic or anger. Instead, Michael quickly provided Rebecca with critical details about his arrest, including Jenkins and Sullivan's actions and their suspicious behavior. "Do you think we stand a chance?" Michael asked, his voice low but resolute. Rebecca smiled, her gaze steady. "I don't just think we have a chance. I know we will win, but this is about more than just clearing your name. We need to uncover what's going on here." After reviewing the initial documents and statements, Rebecca realized this wasn't a random case. The evidence of Jenkins and Sullivan's fabrication was glaringly obvious. No valid search warrant, no dash cam footage, and drug evidence that seemed far too perfectly packaged. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became that Jenkins and Sullivan were just the tip of a much larger iceberg of systemic abuse of power within the police department. Rebecca unearthed records of previous arrests made by Jenkins and Sullivan. She also demanded that the police department provide the patrol logs for the night of Michael's arrest. In court, she highlighted inconsistencies between Jenkins' testimony about when they stopped Michael and the actual GPS data from the patrol car. This data clearly shows that you and your partner stopped for 15 minutes before approaching my client's vehicle. This doesn't match your claim that you acted immediately upon noticing a traffic violation, Rebecca argued. Could it be that during those 15 minutes you were preparing to find the bag of drugs? She also identified patterns in previous cases. Victims who were predominantly black, stopped for minor infractions, and later accused based on dubious evidence. Many of them had been unable to defend themselves, leading to wrongful convictions. This isn't just about Michael Davis, Rebecca told her team. This is about an entire system abusing its power and destroying the lives of innocent people. Meanwhile, Jenkins and Sullivan continued to act as if they had already won. In the police station, they boasted about their actions and dismissed Rebecca's involvement. "I told you, Turner won't be able to do anything," Jenkins said to Sullivan upon hearing that Rebecca had taken the case. "She might be famous, but no one dares mess with us." Sullivan nodded in agreement. "We just have to stick to our story. The evidence is clear. There's no way she can break it." What they didn't realize was that Rebecca had already uncovered proof that not only had they fabricated Michael's case, but they also had a history of violating the rights of others. Rebecca decided that the only way to protect Michael and reveal the truth was to bring the case into the public eye. She began gathering witnesses, including individuals who had suffered under Jenkins and Sullivan's abuse of power. At the same time, she worked with legal and technical experts to scrutinize the evidence Jenkins and Sullivan had submitted. "We're not just defending Michael Davis," Rebecca told her team. "We're going to dismantle the entire system behind them." Rebecca's involvement gave Michael a renewed sense of security and determination. He realized that his arrest wasn't simply the result of a few bad actors, but a manifestation of a much larger, deeply rooted injustice. Despite knowing that the battle ahead would be grueling, both Michael and Rebecca were united in their ultimate goal, exposing the truth and protecting those without a voice. Rebecca Turner's arrival wasn't just a beacon of hope for Michael. It was the spark that ignited a fierce battle against a corrupt and unjust system. The days ahead promised to be challenging, but they also held the potential for transformative change. As Rebecca Turner began crafting a defense strategy for Michael Davis, a heated debate erupted within CIA headquarters. Michael's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it had become a focal point of attention, raising concerns among high-ranking officials. They understood that if Michael's identity were revealed in court, it would not only undermine the agency's credibility, but also pose serious risks to the covert missions he had been involved in. In a secure meeting room at CIA headquarters, tense voices echoed. "If we let information about Michael leak, not only current operations but also the safety of our active agents will be compromised," one senior official asserted. "We cannot take that risk." On the other hand, another faction argued that protecting Michael and exposing the truth should take precedence. "We can't abandon him," a loyal colleague of Michael countered. "If we don't stand up for him, This will set a terrible precedent for every agent we have in the future. This internal conflict caused delays in providing support for Michael. Those advocating for secrecy feared that going public would create vulnerabilities within the intelligence system. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Michael were left fighting a battle where everything seemed stacked against them. In his cell, Michael gradually became aware of the CIA's silence. He understood that internal disputes were likely delaying any aid. As a seasoned agent, Michael wasn't surprised. He knew that the CIA prioritized the greater organizational interests, even if it meant sacrificing an individual. "No one's coming," Michael told Rebecca during one of their meetings. "They're debating, and I'm just a piece of the equation they need to solve." Rebecca, accustomed to tough situations, felt the mounting pressure but remained resolute. "We can't rely on them," she said, her gaze firm. "If the CIA won't act, we'll do this on our own. But Michael, you need to be ready for a long fight ahead." Meanwhile, at the police station, Jenkins and Sullivan felt they were firmly in control. There were no signs of CIA intervention, which only bolstered their confidence. "I told you," Jenkins said to Sullivan, sipping his coffee. "No one from the CIA is coming to rescue him. If he was an agent, his organization would have abandoned him by now." Sullivan nodded in agreement, adding, "This just proves we did the right thing. He's no different from all the others we've taken down." However, their overconfidence made them careless, and they began making mistakes. In an attempt to bolster their case, Jenkins and Sullivan fabricated additional details in their reports, but the inconsistencies were glaring and easy for Rebecca to spot. Recognizing the CIA's delay, Rebecca decided to take action on her own. She reached out to legal and technical experts, seeking new evidence to prove Michael's innocence. At the same time, she started building a strategy to confront Jenkins and Sullivan in court. "We need a decisive blow," Rebecca told Michael. "Something irrefutable, something that will completely turn the tide." Michael nodded. He knew that to win this battle, he couldn't just rely on the system. He had to use everything he had learned from the CIA. "If they won't help me," Michael said, "then I'll use the very skills they taught me to win." Despite being hindered by internal conflicts, neither Michael nor Rebecca wavered. They understood that this fight wasn't just about clearing Michael's name, it was about exposing a far larger system of corruption. The CIA's hesitation, rather than discouraging them, only strengthened their resolve to face the challenge head-on. While Jenkins and Sullivan continued to believe they were in control, Rebecca and Michael were quietly preparing their strongest counterattack. The groundwork had been laid, and the mistakes Jenkins and Sullivan had made would soon become their undoing. The trial of Michael Davis quickly became the center of national attention. Media outlets covered the case extensively, turning it into a symbol of the pressing issues surrounding racial discrimination and abuse of power. Every day, crowds of protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs with messages like "Justice for Michael" and "End Police Corruption." Meanwhile, others expressed their belief in the police testimony, creating a tense and divided atmosphere. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor confidently presented the case, using fabricated evidence provided by Jenkins and Sullivan to paint a damning picture of Michael. The carefully packaged bag of drugs was displayed before the court, described by the prosecutor as indisputable evidence that Michael was a sophisticated drug dealer. Jenkins and Sullivan each took the stand, recounting their fabricated story with a smoothness that made it seem like undeniable truth. "He was nervous from the moment we stopped him," Jenkins testified before the jury, his face devoid of emotion. "When we asked to check his trunk, he kept making excuses. That's when we found the bag of drugs." Sullivan added more details to make the story even more convincing. The bag of drugs was hidden in a spot only someone familiar with the car would know. This proves Michael isn't just any drug dealer, he's meticulous and professional. Rebecca Turner, acting as Michael's defense attorney, sat silently, meticulously taking notes as Jenkins and Sullivan testified. She knew the jury was being influenced by the prosecutor's confidence and the coherence of the officer's story. But she also knew the truth often lay in the smallest inconsistencies. When it was Rebecca's turn to cross-examine, she began dismantling the prosecutor's narrative by asking questions that caught Jenkins and Sullivan off guard. "Officer Jenkins," she said, her sharp gaze fixed on him, "can you explain why, during the entire stop, your dash cam wasn't operational?" Rebecca then delved deeper into the legal procedures Jenkins and Sullivan had violated. "Officer Jenkins, are you aware that under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, searching and seizing a citizen's property without a valid warrant is a severe violation of personal freedoms?" Jenkins hesitated briefly. I thought the situation didn't require a warrant at the time." Rebecca seized the opportunity and continued, "According to your report, my client fully cooperated, with no signs of resistance or attempts to flee. So, can you explain why you failed to follow the basic protocol of obtaining a warrant from the court before searching his trunk?" The jury began exchanging glances, and Rebecca emphasized, "This violation not only makes the evidence inadmissible, but also raises serious questions about the integrity of the officers involved." Jenkins faltered for a moment but quickly responded, "The dash cam malfunctioned that day. We couldn't get it fixed in time." "How convenient," Rebecca replied, her tone calm but challenging. "And what about the search warrant? Did you have any legal authorization to open my client's trunk?" Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "The circumstances didn't allow us to wait for a warrant. We acted based on professional instinct." Jenkins' response prompted murmurs from the jury. Rebecca knew she had planted the seeds of doubt. The initial confidence of Jenkins and Sullivan began to waver as Rebecca continued to probe the inconsistencies in their testimonies. She pointed out that the timeline they provided for the stop and search didn't align with data from traffic monitoring systems. Furthermore, the bag of drugs they discovered was suspiciously flawless, with no fingerprints, not even Michael's. Rebecca also presented an expert analysis from a legal professional she had brought in, who testified that the circumstances of the drug discovery were highly irregular and likely fabricated. Rebecca's sharp arguments began to shake the jury's confidence in Jenkins and Sullivan's story. Some jurors appeared visibly uneasy, while others struggled to maintain a neutral demeanor. The battle between truth and deceit was becoming more intense than ever. Outside the courthouse, protests grew larger, with both sides attempting to drown out the others' voices. The media provided hourly updates on the latest developments, making the case a focal point of the national debate on racism and police misconduct in American society. As the trial progressed, Jenkins and Sullivan grew increasingly tense. Their initial confidence had been systematically dismantled by Rebecca's relentless questioning. However, Rebecca knew she needed stronger evidence to completely turn the tide, something undeniable that would unravel all the lies in an instant. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew more charged as both sides prepared for the next major developments. Darker secrets were on the verge of being revealed, and the battle between truth and lies was nearing its decisive phase. Rebecca Turner's sharp arguments during the trial made Jenkins and Sullivan increasingly aware of the looming danger. Their confidence began to falter, and they decided they couldn't let things spiral out of control. Realizing that Rebecca was steadily exposing the truth, Jenkins and Sullivan started devising a plan to silence anyone who might threaten their testimony. As Rebecca began to turn the tide, Sullivan grew more uneasy. In a private meeting with Jenkins at the police station, he voiced his concerns. "We shouldn't keep this up. Things are getting out of hand. If they find out, there'll be no way out for us." Jenkins dismissed Sullivan's fears with a determined glare. "What are you thinking? This isn't just about our job. It's our only chance to make a name for ourselves. If you can't keep up, I'll handle it myself." This confrontation highlighted the stark differences in their personalities. Sullivan, though fearful, continued to participate, coerced by Jenkins' psychological pressure and the implicit threat that he'd take the blame if their plan unraveled. Meanwhile, Jenkins grew increasingly bold, willing to threaten anyone, including Sullivan, to maintain control. At the police station, a young officer named Daniel Hayes began suspecting Jenkins and Sullivan's misconduct. Daniel, an idealistic officer who believed in justice, noticed irregularities in their behavior. Before the trial, he secretly collected evidence that could implicate Jenkins and Sullivan, including short recordings of their discussions about fabricating the arrest of Michael. However, Jenkins quickly picked up on Daniel's dissatisfaction. In a late-night encounter at the station, Jenkins confronted him. "You know, Hayes," Jenkins began, his voice low but threatening, "there are things that not everyone needs to know. You should forget everything if you don't want your career and your life to fall apart." Sullivan added coldly, "We know you have a family, a wife and 2 young kids, right? It'd be a shame if something unfortunate happened." Under pressure and fear, Daniel backed down. He changed his testimony in court, refusing to provide any information that might incriminate Jenkins and Sullivan. With Daniel's withdrawal, Rebecca lost a key witness, and the scales seemed to tip further in favor of Jenkins and Sullivan. But Jenkins and Sullivan didn't stop at intimidating witnesses. They also manipulated testimonies in the courtroom. They coordinated with close colleagues to produce statements that supported their version of events. Another officer called to the stand claimed he had seen Michael acting suspiciously on the night of his arrest, bolstering their fabricated narrative. Sitting at the defense table, Rebecca could sense that these testimonies were rehearsed, but she needed more than intuition to overturn the case. Each false testimony added to the jury's doubt, and the prosecutor grew increasingly confident in portraying Michael as a professional criminal. Despite the mounting challenges, Rebecca refused to be overwhelmed. She began focusing on details Jenkins and Sullivan might have overlooked in their complacency. She requested administrative records from the police station, hoping to find evidence of internal manipulation. She also enlisted technical experts to re-examine recordings and data submitted by Jenkins and Sullivan. Rebecca knew time was running out. She needed irrefutable evidence, something powerful enough to dismantle Jenkins and Sullivan's entire story, even with their attempts to cover it up. During her investigation, Rebecca discovered a significant discrepancy in Jenkins' reports. The timeline he provided for stopping Michael didn't match data from traffic surveillance systems. More importantly, a surveillance video from a nearby store showed Jenkins and Sullivan stopping at the scene before arresting Michael, clearly preparing for their staged narrative. Rebecca recognized this as a crucial opportunity, but also understood that Jenkins and Sullivan were not easily defeated. They had already proven their willingness to do whatever it took to protect themselves, even if it meant threatening or ruining others' lives. As the trial progressed, Rebecca noticed the immense pressure on Michael. He had endured public humiliation, and now all hope rested on Rebecca's ability to reveal the truth. Yet Michael, despite the injustice he faced, remained remarkably composed. He, trusted Rebecca to find a way to prove his innocence, and was ready to do everything he could to assist her. Meanwhile, Jenkins and Sullivan, though outwardly calm, began to feel the strain. The inconsistencies in their testimonies and Rebecca's new findings made them realize things were no longer as secure as they had believed. Still, they decided to push forward, convinced their manipulation and lies would continue to obscure the truth. The legal battle was entering its most intense phase, and both sides understood that even the smallest mistake could decide the fate of everything. Rebecca Turner knew that if she wanted to save Michael Davis, she had to act swiftly and target the weaknesses in the narrative Jenkins and Sullivan had fabricated. After days of studying case files, analyzing testimonies, and meticulously reviewing the evidence, she was ready to strike back. Rebecca's strategy focused not only on exposing the false testimonies, but also on highlighting the critical procedural violations committed by the two officers, shaking the foundation of the case. Rebecca began by directly questioning Jenkins. With a calm but piercing tone, she asked questions that forced him to carefully consider his responses. "Officer Jenkins, you testified that you and your partner discovered the bag of drugs in my client's trunk. Can you explain why no valid search warrant was obtained before you opened the trunk?" Jenkins hesitated briefly. "We didn't have time to get a warrant. The situation required immediate action." "And what exactly about the situation made you believe immediate action was necessary?" Rebecca continued. "Because according to the report, my client was fully cooperative, with no signs of attempting to flee or posing any threat." Jenkins began to stumble over his words, his discomfort apparent to the jury. Rebecca emphasized that the lack of a search warrant was a serious violation, undermining the legitimacy of any evidence obtained. Next, Rebecca turned her attention to the bag of drugs presented as key evidence by Jenkins and Sullivan. With the help of a forensic expert, she revealed that the bag bore no fingerprints belonging to Michael, a glaring inconsistency given Jenkins' claim that they had caught him in the act. "Can you explain why this bag of drugs, which you claim belongs to my client, has none of his fingerprints on it?" Rebecca asked Sullivan, who was visibly tense on the witness stand. I'm not sure," Sullivan stammered. "Maybe he used gloves." Rebecca allowed herself a faint, sardonic smile. "So, you're suggesting that Michael Davis, a man you described as acting in haste, somehow managed to wear gloves to conceal his fingerprints? Doesn't that sound rather implausible?" A heavy silence filled the courtroom as jurors exchanged skeptical glances. Rebecca pressed further, questioning the absence of dash cam footage, a detail Jenkins and Sullivan had attributed to a technical malfunction. But Rebecca was prepared for this excuse. "Can you provide recent maintenance records for the dash cam, or any documentation proving that the system was indeed malfunctioning on the night in question?" she asked Jenkins. Jenkins said nothing, his confidence visibly eroding. Rebecca seized the moment, pointing out that there was no record in the police department's files to support Jenkins' claim. "This isn't an isolated incident," Rebecca said, turning toward the jury. "It's a pattern of lack of transparency, of evidence being hidden or manipulated." Each of Rebecca's questions was a blow to the carefully constructed story Jenkins and Sullivan had created. The jury, which initially seemed inclined toward the prosecution's case, began to waver. The details Rebecca presented not only cast doubt, but also exposed the officers' lies and abuse of power. Outside the courtroom, protests grew louder and larger, with chants demanding justice for Michael and an investigation into the police department. The media began shifting its focus from Michael's case to broader questions about the transparency and conduct of law enforcement. Meanwhile, Jenkins and Sullivan, though trying to maintain their composure, could not hide their growing unease. Rebecca had struck at vulnerabilities they hadn't anticipated. The inconsistencies in their testimonies combined with Rebecca's evidence made them realize their initial confidence was eroding. "I think we need to prepare for the worst," Sullivan said to Jenkins one evening after court. But Jenkins, clinging to his arrogance, replied, "We're not losing, not after coming this far." What they didn't realize was that the legal battle was far from over, and their lies were on the brink of being fully exposed. After days of tense proceedings, Rebecca Turner knew that to save Michael Davis, she needed a decisive blow to completely overturn the case. She couldn't rely solely on the inconsistencies in Jenkins and Sullivan's testimonies. She needed irrefutable evidence. At this critical moment, a breakthrough emerged, a secret recording she never imagined would fall into her hands. Rebecca received the recording from an internal source at the police department, someone who had secretly captured a conversation between Jenkins and Sullivan. In the recording, the two discussed how to stage a scene to meet their work quotas. Their statements not only revealed the fabricated nature of Michael's arrest, but also implicated them in similar misconduct with other victims. "We just need to set up a few more cases to hit this month's quota," Jenkins' voice said in the recording. "As long as we pick the right people, those who can't defend themselves, no one will question us." Sullivan replied smugly, "And if anyone does, we always have ways to shut them up." Rebecca was stunned as she listened to the recording, but her shock quickly turned into resolve. This was the evidence she needed, a clear admission of abuse of power and orchestration of false charges. The source of the recording was Daniel Hayes, an officer in the department who had previously been threatened by Jenkins and Sullivan. After many sleepless nights, Daniel decided he could no longer remain silent. He was willing to testify against Jenkins and Sullivan, despite the risk of retaliation. "I've stayed silent for too long," Daniel told Rebecca during a private meeting. "I can't let them keep destroying innocent lives." Rebecca immediately added Daniel's testimony to the case file, knowing that an insider witness would be a critical blow to Jenkins and Sullivan's defense. At the same time, the CIA, after resolving internal conflicts, decided to intervene to protect Michael. They provided a wealth of digital evidence, including location data, and Michael's mission schedule, proving that he was engaged in a covert government operation at the exact time Jenkins and Sullivan accused him of transporting drugs. Rebecca presented this data in court, showing that it was impossible for Michael to be simultaneously carrying out a government mission and committing the crimes alleged by the prosecution. The combination of the recording, Daniel's testimony, and the evidence from the CIA painted a clear picture. Jenkins and Sullivan had staged the entire incident. When the recording was played in the courtroom, everyone present fell silent in astonishment. The brazen remarks by Jenkins and Sullivan about fabricating evidence, coupled with their smug tone, exposed the truth in a way that could not be denied. Seizing the moment, Rebecca cross-examined Jenkins in front of the jury. "Officer Jenkins, do you deny that this is your voice in the recording?" Jenkins, his face pale, tried to deflect. I don't remember saying that." "Don't remember?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp. "Or do you not want to remember because the truth is undeniable and indefensible?" The new evidence not only shifted the jury's perspective, but also shattered the prosecutor's initial confidence. Jenkins and Sullivan, once key witnesses in the case, now found themselves scrambling to defend against irrefutable evidence. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers upon hearing the news of the recording and the whistleblower's testimony. The media swiftly picked up the story, turning Michael's case into a symbol of the fight against abuse of power and systemic injustice. Jenkins and Sullivan, aware that their case was unraveling, clung desperately to their fabricated story. However, cracks in their unity began to show. Sullivan, in a moment of weakness, even considered negotiating a plea deal to reduce his sentence, which only increased the pressure on Jenkins. Rebecca, now armed with all the necessary evidence, was nearing the conclusion of her work. She knew the legal battle was approaching its climax, and the truth was on the verge of prevailing. Yet she also understood that Jenkins and Sullivan might still have one final card to play, and she needed to prepare for any contingency. As the trial entered its most intense phase, all eyes were on the courtroom, waiting for the outcome that would determine the fate of everyone involved. The trial reached its decisive moment when Rebecca Turner played her boldest card, revealing Michael Davis's identity as a CIA agent. It was a risky but necessary move, as it not only proved Michael's innocence but also illuminated the sinister motives behind Jenkins and Sullivan's actions. Standing before the court with a resolute gaze, Rebecca delivered the revelation that no one in the jury had anticipated. My client, Michael Davis, is not just an ordinary citizen. He is a CIA agent entrusted with the duty of safeguarding national security. At the time of the alleged crime, he was engaged in a covert mission and could not possibly have been involved in the criminal activities the prosecution has accused him of. The courtroom fell into stunned silence before whispers erupted across the room. Journalists scrambled to take notes and capture photos, turning the disclosure into front-page news. At the witness table, Jenkins and Sullivan visibly lost their composure. "This can't be," Jenkins muttered, his words drowned in the tense atmosphere. Rebecca pressed forward, emphasizing that Jenkins and Sullivan's actions were not isolated, but indicative of a broader network of corruption within the police department. She presented records from previous cases, demonstrating how the two officers had used the same methods to fabricate evidence and frame innocent individuals, primarily targeting people of color. The testimony of Daniel Hayes, the internal whistleblower, was also introduced, exposing how Jenkins and Sullivan manipulated cases to meet quotas and consolidate their power within the department. With a trembling but determined voice, Daniel recounted what he had witnessed and been coerced into participating in. "When I realized what they were doing, I knew it was wrong," Daniel said, "but I was threatened and forced to stay silent. Today, I can't stay silent any longer." The truth, laid bare, was a shock to the jury. The overwhelming evidence, from the recording, Daniel's testimony to Michael's CIA identity, left no room for doubt about Jenkins and Sullivan's deceit. Some jurors displayed visible anger, not only at the injustice inflicted on Michael, but also at how blatantly the system they trusted had been exploited. When Jenkins and Sullivan were called to testify one last time, their initial confidence had completely crumbled. Jenkins attempted to deny the authenticity of the recording, but Rebecca quickly clarified that there was no evidence to suggest it was fabricated. Sullivan, already under immense pressure, finally cracked. In a tense moment, he admitted they had staged Michael's arrest to meet their quota. "We didn't think it would go this far," Sullivan said, his voice growing quieter. "We were just doing what the system demanded of us." When the jury returned after deliberations, the entire courtroom held its breath. Rebecca and Michael remained composed until the final moment. The four-person stood and announced, "We unanimously find the defendant, Michael Davis, not guilty." The room erupted in applause and cheers from Michael's supporters. Family and friends shed tears of joy, while Jenkins and Sullivan sat motionless, realizing that everything they had tried to hide had been completely exposed. Immediately after the trial, The judge ordered a full investigation into the actions of Jenkins, Sullivan, and others implicated within the police department. Both officers were charged with crimes, including evidence fabrication, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. This marked the beginning of the collapse of the corrupt network they had built. Michael Davis's case was not just a personal victory. It became a symbol of the fight against injustice and abuse of power. Media outlets covered the story extensively, and protesters outside the courthouse celebrated as though they had won a victory for the entire community. Though exonerated, Michael maintained his characteristic calm. He understood that this was only the first step in a longer journey to expose the full truth and reform a system corrupted from within. With a resolute gaze, he vowed to use this painful experience as fuel to fight for those without a voice. The truth had been revealed, but the battle for justice was far from over. When the trial concluded, Michael Davis's victory not only marked his exoneration but also ignited a major crisis within the police department. Jenkins and Sullivan, who had once stood confidently before the court, now faced criminal charges including abuse of power, evidence fabrication, and human rights violations. Their downfall was not merely the result of this case, but the culmination of a long history of misconduct. Under mounting legal pressure, Sullivan, who had always played a subordinate role to Jenkins, began to express remorse. In an interrogation with the Special Investigation Team, Sullivan unexpectedly offered to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. "I've done wrong," Sullivan said, his voice trembling. "But I wasn't the only one. Others in the department were involved, and some even encouraged us to do it." Sullivan revealed a series of other wrongful acts within the police department, from fabricating evidence and accepting bribes to covering up cases of police violence. His testimony implicated not only Jenkins, but also higher-ranking individuals who had silently supported and shielded their misconduct. In contrast, Jenkins remained defiant, denying all allegations and insisting that he had only followed protocol. However, with the recording, Daniel Hayes's testimony, and Sullivan's cooperation, Jenkins had no escape. "We were just doing what was necessary to protect the community," Jenkins said during an interrogation, still trying to justify his actions. But even his former colleagues, once supportive, began to distance themselves, fearing their association with Jenkins would drag them down. Although vindicated, Michael could not escape the profound consequences of the ordeal. The incident had tarnished his reputation, leaving him subject to suspicion from some in society who stubbornly clung to Jenkins and Sullivan's narrative. Michael also struggled with the emotional scars. The days he spent detained and falsely accused left deep wounds. He often recalled the moments when he was treated as a criminal, even knowing he was completely innocent. "It's not just me," Michael said in an interview after the trial. "There are hundreds, thousands of people who've gone through the same thing, but they don't get the chance to be heard. I'm lucky they aren't." Sullivan's testimony led to a sweeping investigation within the police department. Numerous officers were suspended or forced to resign. Local authorities also ordered comprehensive reforms, including increased oversight and greater transparency in daily law enforcement operations. Still, Michael understood these changes were only the beginning. He continued to meet with community organizations and participate in speaking engagements, sharing his story to advocate for deeper reforms. Sullivan, to atone for his actions, volunteered for programs supporting victims of police violence. He admitted his wrongdoings and expressed genuine remorse. Yet, his actions could not undo the harm he had caused. "No apology can ever make up for what I've done," Sullivan said in a statement, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to do what's right." Despite his emotional scars, Michael refused to let them hold him back. He decided to turn his pain into motivation to fight for justice. Michael agreed to testify before Congress, sharing his personal experiences to push for systemic police reform. "This isn't about me," Michael said. "It's about all the people who've been silenced. I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through." The case became a catalyst for broader changes, not just within the police department, but also in how society viewed and addressed issues of justice and human rights. Michael's journey was not just the story of one man standing against injustice, it was a powerful reminder of the strength of truth and determination. While Sullivan sought redemption, Jenkins faced a harsh sentence, and an entire system was forced to change. Michael's story became a symbol of hope and resilience in the fight against injustice. When the media spotlight dimmed after the trial, Michael Davis realized his battle was far from over. Though exonerated, the emotional and social scars he endured remained. However, he refused to let them hold him back. Instead, Michael decided to use his story to inspire real change, not just for himself, but for the millions of others who faced similar injustices. Michael's testimony before Congress was a moment of profound emotion and gravity. In a packed chamber filled with lawmakers, journalists, and members of the public, he recounted his journey, from his wrongful arrest and false accusations to the eventual revelation of the truth. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident," Michael said, his voice steady and commanding. "This system, with its flaws and abuses, has hurt countless people. I was lucky to be vindicated, but how many others never get that chance?" Michael called for comprehensive police reform, including increased accountability, stricter oversight, and the elimination of policies that enable abuse of power. His testimony was not only an indictment of those who had wronged him, but also an urgent plea for action. Michael's story quickly spread across the nation, becoming a rallying cry for justice movements. Social organizations and anti-racism advocacy groups reached out to him, eager to collaborate on creating broader change. His speeches at schools, churches, and community events ignited hope and awakened a sense of responsibility in many. "He's not just a victim," one activist said in an interview. "He's a symbol of the power of truth and determination." While dedicating much of his time to public advocacy, Michael also faced the personal toll left by the case. He attended therapy sessions to cope with the trauma, including sleepless nights and lingering questions about trust and justice. Though haunted by memories of being treated like a criminal, he refused to let them define his future. One day, driving a new car to replace the one tied to his ordeal, Michael felt a shift. The familiar road home no longer symbolized fear, but hope and resolve. He understood that his journey had opened a new chapter, one where he could stand not just for himself, but for those without a voice. Michael's new mission extended beyond seeking justice. It aimed to build a better society. He joined a national initiative to improve relations between police and communities, fostering dialogue and mutual understanding. He also founded a nonprofit organization to support victims of wrongful arrests, offering them legal and emotional assistance. "Justice isn't just about vindication," Michael said in a speech. "Justice is about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I did." Returning home after a long day of work, Michael looked around his living room, a space that had once witnessed his anxiety and despair. Now, it was a place of peace. Though the fight for justice would be long, Michael felt ready to face every challenge ahead. What Jenkins and Sullivan had done left a deep mark on Michael's life, but also changed how society viewed justice and accountability. Despite the scars, Michael turned them into symbols of strength and resilience. Before closing this chapter, Michael decided to confront Jenkins directly. A meeting was arranged at the prison where Jenkins awaited trial on new charges. When Michael entered the room, his expression betrayed no anger or hatred, only the calm of someone who knew he had prevailed. "Jenkins," Michael began, his voice steady and powerful, "you thought you could hide the truth forever. You thought power made you untouchable. But looking at you now, all I see is a man defeated by his greed and arrogance." Jenkins, sitting across the table, struggled to maintain composure, his eyes tense. "You don't understand. The system's been like this forever. I just did what I had to do to survive." "No," Michael interrupted, his gaze sharp. "You did it because you wanted power. You wanted people to fear you. But justice isn't something you can manipulate forever. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone you've hurt. And now you'll pay for all of it." Jenkins remained silent, his eyes betraying a regret he would never admit aloud. Michael stood, leaving the room without looking back. To him, Jenkins was no longer a threat, merely a symbol of the rot he had overcome. With a determined gaze and a heart full of hope, Michael no longer looked back at the past but toward a fairer future, where truth and justice would prevail. The story of Michael Davis is not just about one man's journey to clear his name. It's a powerful reminder that truth and justice must always be defended. Despite facing injustice and enduring pain, Michael turned his struggles into a force for building a better society. What do you think of Michael's courage and the lessons from his journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.